Another Malazan book done. I can't wait to pick up Midnight Tides and carry on with the characters I've become attached to.
You thought?
What do you mean?
That's not what's gonna happen. Instead, what's gonna happen is you're gonna be thrown on an all-new continent with all-new characters yet again!
Why would Erikson do that? He's already done that before in Malazan. It was worth it then, but it now just seems extraordinarily jarring.
Because you! You don't need to be emotionally invested in characters or storylines. No, instead, all that matters in fantasy is building a bigger world. Bigger, 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 bigger!
But that seems extraordinarily antithetical to me as a reader being able to develop an emotional connection with these characters, you know, having some form of catharsis reach through the narrative. Like, this is something that's just resetting.
That doesn't matter! All that matters is Steven Erikson gets to take you, the reader, and throw you into a well of never being well set up. No exposition, just tossed into events as the reader!
But what about, like, Whiskey Jack? I'm really connected.
Who cares? Only losers need stories set up for them and have any form of explanation. Real hardcore fans need to be thrown in and figure it out on their own, stupid.
Okay, what if I just skip this book and move on to a Malazan book that does pick up with the characters I actually give a damn about 5 books into the series?
Steven Erikson fans will break into your house with socks full of nickels and beat you to a bloody pulp!
Okay, cut the music. I recorded the fairly obnoxious intro here for this video to emphasize my largest criticism I have up until this point. Adding a whole new restart 5 books into your series to me does not have any charm left. I do not enjoy what Steven Erikson is putting me through in that sense. So that seems extremely negative, and I want to just get it out of the way at the beginning because it is how I'm feeling towards Midnight Tides right now. Wow, the amount of energy you put in just to like go back to the beginning. I don't feel like I have made good progress in one series. I feel like I've stutter-stepped through 3 separate ones and I'm completely disconnected with each of them. But that's pretty much where my criticisms of Midnight Tides that are that severe end. I do think this is, once again, a very dense Malazan book. Steven Erikson does like to just Spartan kick you into his worlds with minimal setup, and you have this constant feeling every time one of these restarts happen of just having to figure it all out on your own, and it's a bit tedious, but once it gets rolling, once you're a third of the way in the book, suddenly it all starts to click into place. And while most authors are going to hold your hand and walk you to the steps that Steven Erikson wants you to just be at right away, I guess for his more masochistic fan base, this works. So just carry over a lot of the criticisms I had in the past where it's dense, it's difficult. I fully understand and get why this series probably isn't for 60% of fantasy fans. It's just way too much. And now let's go ahead and get into the positives, because Steven Erikson is continuing to improve as someone who is crafting this narrative to me. I still enjoy the guy's work. I mean, the world building you do have to just respect, although I found this to be quite the drastic turn. Instead of epic moments coming from these grand military strategic clashes, now we're having more of a magical elements that are ramped up here, which is really surprising to say with how grand the magical displays have been so far. But the spotlight for Midnight Tides for me really did focus on Erikson's magical elements. I also do want to note the prologue to this I found incredibly enticing. Anytime you kind of jump back and give me a more, this is the foundations moment of your story, I'm going to be drooling and wanting more. I just have that bit of fantasy nerd in me where if you're showing me the elder gods or something along those lines, I'm going to be hooked right in. Once again, we are seeing Malazan and Steven Erikson focus on themes of military might, the culture of just brutality that exists there, the ramifications of war. Steven Erikson does not let up on that. It's not on the same level as like the Poppy War, where you're going to have the victims of, you know, one of the worst events in human history just reskinned to fantasy monologue about how horrific it is, but you have stuff that's similar along those lines. You have a very realistic look to the ramifications of war and the build-up between what seems like a giant exhale from the last book, a giant moment release of just action and tension. This book feels more like the inhale. We're building again to then step into another grand epic Steven Erikson exhale. I don't know why I'm going with a respiratory system for what I'm establishing here, but there does seem to be that 1-2 with Malazan, where you'll have a book that is just huge, epic war, and then you'll step back in the next book and build up once again. Seems to be true, and we are on that inhale with Midnight Tides. Not that there's not action. There's once again loads of Erikson action. 1-2 punches coming through, hammering home hard. It's just annoying to me that I'm not seeing my characters I care about and have relationships with execute some grand moments or get in this action. No, I'm reassigning to a whole other culture, whole other tribe, across another continent. But let's go ahead and get into the setup for this book here. Fairly late in the review to getting into what's actually happening in this book, but let's talk about it. So we're on a whole other plane. New history, new culture, let's get into that. There are these recently unified tribes under a warlock king, and they have another group that they are tense with, let's call it that. So not only is this delicate alliance in place, but there is another enemy for them to be cautious about. This enemy starts violating the treaty in a way where I went, wow, that's realistic to the real world of this is something that would cause tension between nations, but I can't believe in Malazan this is the thing that we're gonna have cause the tension between. Okay, whatever. Basically, they're harvesting seals. Seals are being murdered. And that causes problems. Now, I want to make it clear, I don't think that's silly. In fact, that's a very realistic political problem. If you are dependent on a certain food source or what have you, and suddenly that starts being taken by someone who shouldn't be doing that, then yeah, that's going to cause a rising tension, escalation, boom bow. That can be an initiating event. We've seen wars in the real world start over things not much different than that. So, hey, I'm not judging. In fact, I'm giving praise, but it's still kind of like seals. And we jump around in typical Erikson fashion from character to character, continuing along with this storyline and having these subplots that, for me, really were the driving heart of getting to know characters here. We actually had some really nice characterization. Erikson is continuing to improve throughout Malazan of having actual human-feeling characters populate his world. Guardians of the Moon did not have that for me. Now we are having this, oh look, that's the guy I know, and he has this personality and these flaws. Wonderful. So I'm actually just having this rising hope and expectation as I'm pulling through Malazan. It started as a series that I thought was good, had great aspects to it, but I didn't necessarily love as a reader. But as we're getting deeper in, now that I'm on book 5, halfway through the classic iconic 10, I'm beginning to see the light. I'm seeing how Steven Erikson is not only crafting this immensely large world, but he is finally populating with characters, subplots, and all kinds of events that make it feel rich and vibrant. It's no longer huge, it's now also deep in my mind. Greatly appreciated. Do I wish he had kind of restructured how he built this all together so that it grew more naturally and not just constantly giving me whiplash as a reader? Hell yes. But I'm not angry. I'm not sitting here just detesting the series. I just think it was clunky. Malazan is clunky in its foundations. But I get if it's his style and his fans love it, sure. I'm just hoping by book 10, we have some full, okay, why do we need to know about all of this to understand Malazan? Is it all going to come together? Is it all going to split apart? Luckily, I've not had that spoiled for me, so I'm looking forward to finding out on my own. So if you've gotten to this point in Malazan, you're really loving it, I don't need to sell you more. You can continue on, you'll be just fine. If you've been struggling a bit, I think you'll like it more and more. Go ahead and get through Midnight Tides as well, because not only are there really great magical elements here, Erikson seems to be taking a lot of the energy he puts into military strategy and instead refocusing on building a magical system plotline and just execution that pays off in spades. I really like that aspect of it. And we're also seeing a richer variation and deeper form of characters, a lot of which are kind of on par with his best in this story, begin to really come to the forefront. Yes, there's some odd political choices, but they're realistic, and Steven Erikson really loves his hyper-realism, so I'm down for it. It doesn't feel out of place at all. I do want to end this review by throwing my 2 cents into the narrator debate here. Michael Page, for me, does a better job of realizing Malazan. I understand the original one, Ralph, is loved by quite a few people, but I think in terms of embodying the characters as I envisioned them, Michael Page is doing a better job. I actually did dual read this one between having a physical book, which I returned to my library, and the audiobook. I gotta say, I really enjoyed this audiobook more than the last few audiobooks that weren't Michael Page because he is just a better voice of fantasy to me. Totally personal preference. I just want to throw that out there. If you're one of the people who, like me, at first was very much so turned off by the audiobooks for Malazan, Malazan because of the original narration. Go ahead and switch back if you want to, because I think Michael Page does a exquisite job. In my Malazan rankings, I'm going to put Midnight Tides just under Memory of Ice. It's not as good as that one. That one right now seems to be Steven Erikson's just masterpiece, and Midnight Tides is a very solid follow-up that I'm just disappointed to see once again. I'm being required to fully restart my immersion into a new culture, continent, world. Anyway, guys, let me know what you think of this video and Malazan in the comments down below. Like and subscribe if you have not already. Hit the Patreon if you want to support what I do here, and have a good one, y'all. Peace.